Get into it. Yes. We're back. Hi. We're back yet again with Storytime with Chris. As you always know, I don't need you to watch these videos when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them in your downtime, nap time, max, relax, and chillaxing time, in between time, mean time, scheme time, study time, break time, CP time, anytime that you want to hear a highly animated voice bring you wonderful stories of magic, fantasy, science fiction, adventure, and many, many more in between. Hi. Oh yes, that's much better. So, kids, if you are not aware, the Grammys was tonight. What are the Grammys? The Grammys is a annual American awards ceremony that celebrates music not just from American artists, from artists all over the world that get nominated for major awards such as Best Album of the Year, Best New Artist, Record of the Year, Song of the Year, Best Rap Album, Best Progressive R&B Album, Best R&B Album, Best R&B Performance, Best Pop Album, Best Pop Solo, Best Pop Duo. So many different categories in music. Best rock album, best jazz album, best jazz performance, so many different things that get nominated. And what I will say is this: last night was the first time that Beyonce ever won Album of the Year for her album Cowboy Carter, which also won Best Country Album of the Year, which Doechii, who is another she's a new artist, but who's another incredible black woman who won for Best Rap Album of the Year, only being the third black woman to ever win in that category. The other two would be Cardi B and Lauryn Hill. Sabrina Carpenter won for Best Pop Album, and Lady Gaga and Bruno Mars won for Best Pop Duo. Chappell Roan won for Best New Artist. Kendrick Lamar won Record of the Year, Song of the Year, Best Rap Performance, and Best Rap Song of the Year. So everybody who I felt. Oh, and Samara Joy won Best Jazz Album of the Year. If you don't know who that is, please check her out. She's amazing. What I will say is this: no matter what your talent is, whether it's writing, whether it's reading, whether it's music, singing, performing music on an instrument, or through electronics, through DJ work, on a soundboard and whatnot, do it because you love it. Go and pursue a dream or a talent because you love it. And then the blessings will then follow. What do I mean by that? There were so many artists on that stage who, like me, would sit at home and be like, I want to be that. I want to get that award. I want to be recognized. I want to be iconic. And if you keep at it, if you truly have a vision, if you put your heart and soul into it, and people can resonate with that, you could be on that stage. You could be the next Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Director, Best Cinematographer, Best New Artist, Album of the Year, Record of the Year. You can do anything, children. You can do anything that you ever desire to put forth for yourself. You got amazing people who, even in my repertoire of people I love, some of those artists have passed on. Others are still here that have always inspired me to love the magic of music and how music is a healing mechanism. It is a worldwide phenomenon that everybody can share with. Whether it's pop music, rap music, classical music, jazz, hip hop, which when I was growing up, hip hop and jazz were hip hop and rap were two different genres. Whether it's alternative music, punk, house music, electronica, techno, country. Music is for everybody. Music is for us to connect and communicate our lives, our dreams, our desires in a way that is just celestial and just powerful. Imagine this. There are people all the way over in Japan, India, Russia, Austria, Italy, Africa that love artists that are born and raised over here. And they may not know, and I know this from my own personal standpoint. I do speak Japanese fluently, but even before I officially learned it was taught in college, the proper means to learn it, I loved J-pop artists when I was 12 and didn't necessarily know what the words meant on paper until later on, but the music itself moved my body and moved my spirit to be so involved in it. And I didn't have to know the words really to appreciate the magic of what it was doing to my spirit and my body. And I just love music. God, Billy Joel, Journey, Erica Badu, Anita Baker, Deborah Cox, Beyonce, Destiny's Child, TLC, Jill Scott, Sugar Ray, Hootie and the Blowfish, Stephanie Mills, Janet Jackson, Tony Braxton, all the Braxtons actually. So many Sheryl Crow, Reba McEntire, so many incredible artists that when I was a kid shaped my world and changed it and showed me that music is not just for one people, it is for all people. So I'm gonna get off my soapbox. Let's get to the story. But that's what I wanted to say. I felt like everybody that won last night was deserved. I don't feel as though anybody was snubbed in any type of way unless I missed something. But yes, the Grammys is a great entertainment for those who watched, which by the way, Sabrina Carpenter's performance was hilarious. She just she killed it. Comedy genius. Love her. Also Doechie's performance was great. And love Cynthia Erivo's tribute for those who have passed on, for Quincy Jones and all those other amazing artists that have since passed on. Just a great time. Can't wait for the Oscars, which will be after the Super Bowl. So, yay. All right. Now we're back with The Dark is Rising. And the last time we were here, our new character, Will Stanton, went out with his brother to go get to go feed the rabbits and get hay from their neighbor's farm. And it seems as though there's something mysterious going on in this London town, this village. All of a sudden it starts to snow super heavy. That was the one wish that Will wanted for his birthday, on top of wanting to see his brother come back from the military. He received a gift, an iron buckle that he was told to loop into his belt loop to keep on him always. And it seems that the dark and the agents of the dark are about and looking for this object that he was given as a gift. And we're going to see what happens next in this journey of the finding of these artifacts. Midwinter day. He was awoken by music. It beckoned him, lifting and lilting and insisted. Delicate music played by delicate instruments that he could not identify, with one rippling bell-like phrase running through it in a gold thread of delight. There was in this music so much in the deepest enchantment of all his dreams and imaginings that he woke smiling in pure happiness at the sound, which is literally how I feel about music. That is an amazing paragraph, actually. A+. Not that Susan Cooper needs an A+, because this is already published, but still, A+. And I hope one day my novel will be loved by people too. One day. The room was very still and there was no music, and yet Will knew that it had not been a dream. In the moment of his waking, it began to fade, beckoning as it went, and then as he opened his eyes, it was gone. He had only the memory of that one rippling phrase still echoing in his head, and itself fading so fast that he sat up abruptly in bed and reached his arm out to the air as if he could bring it back. He was in the twins' room still. He could hear Robin's breathing slow and deep, but from the other bed, cold light glimmered around the edge of the curtains, but no one was stirring anywhere. It was very early. Will put on his rumpled clothes from the day before and slipped out of the room. He crossed the landing to the central window and looked down. In the first shining moment, he saw the whole strange, familiar world glistening white. The roofs of the outbuildings mounted into square towers of snow, and beyond them all the fields and hedges buried merged into one great flat expanse, unbroken white to the horizon's brim. Will drew in a long, happy breath, silently rejoicing. Then, very faintly, he heard the music again, the same phrase. He swung around, vainly searching for it in the air, as if he might see it somewhere like a flickering light. "Where are you?" It had gone again, and when he looked back through the window, he saw that his own world had gone with it. In that flash, everything had changed. The snow was there as it had been a moment before, but not piled now on roofs or stretching flat over lawns and fields. There were no roofs. There were no fields. There were only trees. Will was looking over a great white forest, a forest of massive trees, sturdy as towers and ancient as rock. They were bare of leaves, clad only in the deep snow that lay untouched along every branch, each smallest twig. They were everywhere. They began so close to the house that he was looking out through the topmost branches of the nearest tree, could have reached out and shaken them if he had dared to open the window. All around him the trees stretched to the flat horizon of the valley. The only break in that white world of branches was away over to the south, where the Thames ran. He could see the bend in the river marked like a single stilled wave in this white ocean of forest, and the shape of it looked as though the river was wider than it should have been. Will gazed and gazed, and when at last he stirred, he found that he was clutching the smooth iron circle threaded onto his belt. The iron was warm to the touch. He went back into the bedroom. "Robin!" he said loudly. "Robin, wake up!" But Robin breathed slowly and rhythmically as before, and did not stir. He ran into the bedroom next door, the familiar small room that he had once shared with James, and shook James roughly by the shoulder. But when the shaking was done, James lay motionless, deeply asleep. Will went out onto the landing again and took a long breath, and he shouted with all his might, "Wake up! Wake up, everyone!" He did not now expect any response, and none came. There was a total silence as deep and timeless as the blanketing snow. The house and everyone in it lay in a sleep that would not be broken. Will went downstairs to pull on his boots and the old sheepskin jacket that had belonged before him to 2 or 3 of his brothers in turn. Then he went out of the back door, closing it quietly behind him, and stood looking out through the quick white vapor of his breath. The strange white world lay stroked by silence. No birds sang. The garden was no longer there in this forested land. Nor were the outbuildings near the old crumbling walls. There lay only a narrow clearing round the house now, hummocked with unbroken snowdrifts. Before the trees began with a narrow path leading away. Will set out down the white tunnel of the path, slowly stepping high to keep the snow out of his boots. As soon as he moved away from the house, he felt very much alone and made himself go on without looking back over his shoulder, because he knew that when he looked, he would find that the house was gone. He accepted everything that came into his mind without thought or question, as if he were moving through a dream, but a deeper part of him knew that he was not dreaming. He was a crystal clear awake in a midwinter day that had been waiting for him to waken to it since the day he'd been born, and he somehow knew for centuries before that. Tomorrow will be beyond imagining. Will came out of the white arched path into the road, paved smooth with snow and edged everywhere by the great trees, and he looked up between the branches and saw a single black rook flap slowly past, high in the early sky. Turning to the right, he walked up the narrow road that in his own time was called Huttercombe Lane. It was the way that he and James had taken to Dawson's farm, the same road that he had trodden almost every day of his life. But it was very different now. Now it was no more than a track through a forest, great snow-burdened trees enclosing it on both sides. Will moved, bright-eyed and watchful through the silence, until suddenly he heard a faint noise ahead of him. All right, now let's see if I can. There we go. Pays to be short, because I can move myself without any problems. Okay, let me try this again. Gotcha. Actually, I moved my headphones. Sorry, y'all. He stood still. The sound came again through the muffling trees, a rhythmical, off-key tapping like a hammer striking metal. It came in short, irregular bursts as though someone were hammering nails. As he stood silent, listening, the world around him seemed to brighten a little. The wood seemed less dense, the snow glittered, and when he looked upward, the strip of sky over Huttercombe Lane was a clear blue. He realized that the sun had risen at last out of the sullen bank of gray cloud. He trudged on towards the sound of hammering and soon came to a clearing. There was no village of Huttercombe anymore, only this. All his senses sprang to life at once. Under a shower of unexpected sounds, sights, smells, he saw 2 or 3 low stone buildings thick-roofed with snow. He saw blue wood smoke rising and smelt it too, and smelt at the same time a voluptuous scent of new-baked bread that brought the water springing in his mouth. He saw that the nearest of the 3 buildings was 3-walled, open to the track, with a yellow fire burning bright inside like a captive sun. Great showers of sparks were spraying out from an anvil where a man was hammering. Beside the anvil stood a tall black horse, a beautiful, gleaming animal. Will had never seen a horse so splendidly midnight in color, with no white markings anywhere. The horse raised its head and looked full at him, pawed the ground, and gave a low whinny. The smith's voice rumbled in protest, and another figure moved out of the shadows behind the horse. Will's breath came faster at the sight of him, and he felt a hollowness in his throat. He did not know why. The man was tall and wore a dark cloak that fell straight like a robe. His hair, which grew low over his neck, showed with a curious reddish tinge. He patted the horse's neck, murmuring in its ear. Then he seemed to sense the cause of its restlessness, and he turned and saw Will. His arms dropped abruptly. He took a step forward and stood there, waiting. The brightness went out of the snow in the sky, and the morning darkened a little as an extra layer of the distant cloud bank swallowed the sun. Will crossed the road through the snow, his hands thrust deep into his pockets. He did not look at the tall, cloaked figure facing him. Instead, he stared resolutely at the other man, bent again now over the anvil, and realized that he knew him. It was one of the men from Dawson's farm, John Smith, old George's son. "Morning, John," he said. The broad-shouldered man in the leather apron glanced up. He frowned briefly, then nodded in welcome. "Excuse me. Hi, Will. You're out early." "It's my birthday," Will said. "A midwinter birthday," said the strange man in the cloak. "Auspicious, indeed." "And you will be 11 years grown?" It was a statement, not a question. Now Will had to look. Bright blue eyes went with the red-brown hair, and the man spoke with a curious accent that was not of the southeast. "That's right," Will said. A woman came out of one of the nearby cottages carrying a basket of small loaves of bread, and with them the new baked smell that had so tantalized Will before. He sniffed. His stomach reminded him that he had eaten no breakfast. The red-haired man took a loaf, wrenched it apart, and held out a half towards him. "Here, you're hungry. Break your birthday fast with me, young Will." He bit into the remaining half of the loaf, and Will heard the crust crackle invitingly. He reached forward, but as he did so, the smith swung a hot horseshoe out of his fire and clapped it briefly on the hoof, clenched between his knees. There was a quick, smoky smell of burning, killing the scent of the new bread. Then the shoe was back in the fire, killing the scent of the new bread, and the smith peering at the hoof. The black horse stood patient and unmoving, but Will stepped back, dropping his arm. "No, thank you," he said. The man shrugged, tearing wolfishly at his bread, and the woman, her face invisible behind the edge of an enveloping shawl, went again with her basket. John Smith swung the horseshoe out of the fire to sizzle and steam in a bucket of water. Get on, said the rider, irritably raising his head. "The day grows. How much longer?" "The iron will not be hurried," said the smith, but he was hammering the shoe in place now with quick, sure strokes. "Done," he said at last, trimming the hoof with a knife. The red-headed man led his horse round, tightened the girths, and slid upwards, quick as a jumping cat, into his saddle. Towering there with the folds of his dark robe flowing over the flanks of the black horse, he looked like a statue carved out of the night. But the blue eyes were staring compellingly down at Will. "I am out to find the walker." He heard his own words with excuse me. "Come on, boy, I'll take you where you want to go. Riding is the only way in snow as thick as this." "No, thank you," Will said. "I'm out to find the walker." He heard his own words with amazement. So that's it, he thought. "But now the rider is abroad," the man said, and all in one quick movement he twitched the horse's head round, bent in the saddle, and made a sweeping grab at Will's arm. Will jerked sideways, but he would not have seized him if the smith, standing at the open wall of the forge, had not leapt forward and dragged him out of reach. For so broad a man, he moved with astonishing speed. The midnight stallion reared, and the cloak rider was almost thrown. He shouted in fury, then recovered himself and sat looking down in a cold contemplation that was more terrible than rage. "That was a foolish move, my friend Smith," he said softly. "We shall not forget." Then he swung the stallion round and rode out in the direction from which Will had come, and the hoofs of his great horse made only a muffled whisper in the snow. John Smith spat derisively and began hanging up his tools. "Thank you," Will said. "I hoped—" He stopped. "Excuse me." "They can do me no harm," the smith said. "I come of the wrong breed for that. And in this time I belong to the road, as my craft belongs to all who use the road. Their power can work no harm on the road through Hunter's Comb. Remember that for yourself." The dream state flickered, and Will felt his thoughts begin to stir. "John," he said, "I know it's true. I must find the walker, but I don't know why. Will you tell me?" The smith turned and looked directly at him for the first time, with a kind of compassion in his withered face. "Ah, no, young Will. Are you so newly awake that you must learn for yourself, and much more this your first day?" "First day?" Will said. "Eat," said the smith. "There is no danger in it now that you will not be breaking bread with the rider. You see how quickly you saw the peril of that, just as you knew there would be greater peril in riding with him. Follow your nose through the day, boy. Just follow your nose." He called to the house. "Martha!" The woman came out again with her basket. This time she drew her shawl and smiled at Will, and he saw blue eyes like the rider's, but with a softer light in them. Gratefully, he munched at the warm, crusty bread, which had been split now and spread with honey. Then beyond the clearing there was a new sound of muffled footfalls in the road, and he spun fearfully round. A white mare without rider or harness trotted into the clearing towards them, a reverse image of the rider's midnight black stallion, tall and splendid and without marking of any kind. Against the dazzle of the snow glittering now as the sun re-emerged from cloud, there seemed a faint golden glow in its whiteness and in the long mane falling over the arched neck. The horse came to stand beside Will, bent its nose briefly and touched his shoulder as if in greeting, then tossed its great white head, blowing a cloud of misty breath into the cold air. Will reached out and laid a reverent hand on its neck. "You come in good time," John said. "The fire is hot." He went back into the forge and pumped once or twice at the bellows arm so that the fire roared, and then he hooked out a shoe from the shadowed wall beyond and thrust it into the heat. "Look well," he said, studying Will's face. "You've not seen a horse like this before, but this will not be the last time." "She's beautiful," Will said, and the mare nuzzled gently at his neck. So, fun fact, kids, a stallion is to refer to a male horse or tall horse. A mare is to refer to a female horse. "Mount," said the smith. Will laughed. It was so obviously impossible. His head reached scarcely to the horse's shoulder, and even if there had been a stirrup, it would have been far out of his reach of his foot. "I'm not joking," said the smith, and indeed he did not look the kind of man who often smiled, let alone made a joke. "It is your privilege. Take hold of her mane where you can reach it, and you will see." To humor him, Will reached up and wound the fingers of both hands in the long, coarse hair of the white horse's mane, low on the neck. In the same instant he felt giddy, his head hummed like a spinning top, and beyond the sound he heard quite plainly, but very far off, the haunting bell-like phrase of music that he had heard before waking that morning. He cried out, his arms jerked strangely, the world spun, and the music was gone. His mind was still groping desperately to recover it when he realized that he was closer to the snow-thick branches of the trees than he had been before. Sitting high on the white mare's broad back, he looked down at the smith and laughed aloud in delight. "When she is shod," the smith said, "she will carry you if you ask." Will sobered suddenly, thinking. Then something drew his gaze up through the arching trees to the sky, and he saw two black rooks flapping lazily past, high up. "No," he said. "I think I'm supposed to go alone." He stroked the mare's neck, swung his legs to one side, and slid the long way down, bracing himself for a jolt, but he found that he landed lightly on his toes in the snow. "Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Goodbye." The smith stood and nodded briefly, then busied himself with the horse, and Will trudged off in some disappointment. He'd expected a word of farewell, at least. From the edge of the trees he glanced back. John Smith had one of the mare's hind legs clenched between his knees and was reaching his gloved hand for his tongs, and what Will saw then made him forget any thought of words or farewells. The smith had done no removing of old horseshoes or trimming of a shoe-torn foot. This horse had never been shod before, and the shoe that was now being fitted to his foot, like the line of 3 other shoes he could now see glinting on the far smithy wall, was not a horseshoe at all, but another shape, a shape he knew very well. All 4 of the white mare's shoes were replicas of the cross-quartered circle that he wore on his own belt. Will walked a little way down the road beneath its narrow roof of blue sky. He put a hand inside his jacket to touch the circle on his belt, and the iron was icy cold. He was beginning to know what that meant by now, but there was no sign of the rider. He could not even see any tracks left by the black horse's feet, and he was not thinking of evil encounters. And he could feel only that something was drawing him more and more strongly towards the place where, in his own time, Dawson's farm would stand. He found the narrow side lane and turned and down it. The track went on a long way, winding in gentle turns. There seemed to be a lot of shrub in this part of the forest. The branching tops of small trees and bushes jetted snow-laden from the mounding drifts, like white antlers from white rounded heads. And then round the next bend, Will saw before him a low square hut, with rough dabbled clay walls and a roof high with a hat of snow like a thick iced cake. In the doorway, paused, irresolute, with one hand in the rickety door, stood the shambling old tramp of the old day before. The old long gray hair was the same, and so were the clothes and the wizened, crafty face. Will came close to the old man and said, as Farmer Dawson had said the day before, "So the walker is abroad."
"Only the one," said the old man. "Only me. What's it to you?"
He sniffed, squinting sideways at Will, and rubbed his nose on one greasy sleeve. "I want you to tell me some things," Will said more boldly than he had felt. "I want to know why you were hanging around yesterday, why you were watching, why the rooks came after you. I want to know," he said in a sudden honest rush, "what it means that you are the walker." At the mention of the rooks, the old man had flinched closer to the hut, his eyes flickering nervously up at the treetops, but now he looked at Will in sharper suspicion than before.
"You can't be the one," he said.
"I can't be what?"
"You can't be. You ought to know all this. Specifically about those hellish birds. Trying to trick me, eh? Trying to trick a poor old man. You're out with the rider, ain't you? You're his boy, ain't you, eh?"
Of course not," Will said. "I don't know what you mean." He looked at this wretched hut. The lane ended here, but there was scarcely even a proper clearing. The trees stood close all around them, shutting out much of the sun. He said, suddenly desolate, "Where's the farm?"
"There isn't any farm," said the old tramp impatiently. "Not yet. You ought to know."
He sniffed again violently and mumbled to himself, and then his eyes narrowed and he came close to Will, peering into his face and giving off a strong, repellent smell of ancient sweat and unwashed skin.
"But you might be the one. You might, if you're carrying the first sign that the old one gave you. Have you got it there, then? Show us. Show the old walker the sign."
Trying hard not to back away in disgust, Will fumbled with the buttons of his jacket. He knew what the sign must be. But as he pushed the sheepskin aside to show the circle looped on his belt, his hand brushed against the smooth iron and felt it burning, biting with icy cold. At the same moment, he saw the old man lean backwards, cringing, staring not at him, but behind him, over his shoulder. Will swung round and saw the cloaked rider on his midnight horse.
"Well met,"
the rider said softly. The old man squealed like a frightened rabbit and turned and ran, blundering through the snowdrifts into the trees. Will stood where he was looking at the rider, his heart thumping so fiercely that it was hard to breathe.
"It was unwise to leave the road, Will Stanton,"
said the man in the cloak, and his eyes blazed like blue stars. The black horse edged forward. Forward. Will shrank back against the side of the flimsy hut, staring into the eyes, and then with a great effort he made his slow arm pull aside his jacket so that the iron circle on his belt shone clear. He gripped the belt at its side. The coldness of the sign was so intense that he could feel the force from it, like the radiation of a fierce burning heat, and the rider paused. His eyes flickered.
"So you have one of them already?"
He hunched his shoulders strangely, and the horse tossed its head. Both seemed to be gaining strength, to be growing taller.
"One will not help you. Not alone. Not yet."
said the rider, and he grew and grew, looming against the white world, while his stallion neighed triumphantly, rearing up, its 4 feet lashing the air so that Will could only press himself helpless against the wall. Horse and rider towered over him like a dark cloud, blotting out both snow and sun. And then dimly he heard new sounds, and the rearing black shape seemed to fall to one side, swept away by a blazing golden light, brilliant with fierce patterns of white-hot circles, suns, stars. Will blinked and saw suddenly that it was the white mare from the smithy, rearing over him in turn. He grabbed frantically at the waving mane, and just as before, he found himself jerked up onto the broad back, bent low over the mare's neck, clutching for his life. The great white horse let out a shrieking cry and leapt for the track through the trees, passing the shapeless black cloud that hung motionless in the clearing like smoke, passing everything in a rising gallop, until they came at last to the road, Hunter Combe Lane, and the road through Hunter's Combe. The movement of the great horse changed to a slow rising powerful lope, and Will heard the beating of his own heart in his ears as the world flashed by in a white blur. Then all at once grayness came around them, and the sun was blacked out. The wind wrenched into Will's collar and sleeves and boot tops, ripping at his hair. Great clouds rushed towards them out of the north, closing in huge gray-black thunderheads. The sky rumbled and growled. One white misted gap remained with a faint hint of blue behind it still, but too was closing. The white horse leapt at it desperately. Over his shoulder, Will saw swooping towards them a darker shape. Even then the giant clouds, the rider, towering immense, his eyes 2 dreadful points of blue-white fire. Lightning flashed, thunder split the sky, and the mare leapt at the crashing clouds as the last gap closed. And they were safe. The sky was blue before and above them, the sun blazing, warming Will's skin. He saw that he had left his Thames Valley behind. Now they were among the curving slopes of the Chiltern Hills, capped with great trees, beech and oak and ash. And running like threads through the snow along the lines of the hills were the hedges that were the marks of ancient fields, very ancient. As Will had always known, more ancient than anything in this world except the hills themselves and the trees. Then on one white hill he saw a different mark. The shape was cut through snow and turf into the chalk beneath the soil, and it would have been hard to make out if it had not been familiar, but Will knew it. The mark was a circle, quartered by a cross. Then his hand were jerked away from the tight clutch on the thick mane, and the white mare gave a long, shrill, whinnying cry that was loud in his ears and then strangely died away into a far distance. And Will was falling, and yet he knew no shock of a fall, but knew only that he was lying face down on cold snow. He stumbled to his feet, shaking himself. The white horse was gone. The sky was clear, and the sunshine warm on the back of his neck. He stood on a snow-mounted hill with a copse of tall trees capping it far beyond, and 2 black birds drifting tiny to and fro above the trees. And before him, standing alone and tall on the white slope leading to nowhere, were 2 great carved wooden doors. And that is where we will end for today. Yes. Love mysteries and surprises and stories. So many more questions to be asked. What was that white mare that came to save Will? Who is this rider? Who is the watcher? What is this powerful darkness that seems to invade this world? And where do these mysterious doors that are just standing in the grove of these trees with no, if you look behind it, it's kind of like, okay, let's do this. So let's say this is the door, right? The front of the door. If you go on the other side of it, it's just the other side of the door. And it's just standing in the middle of this grove of trees. That's pretty much what it's like. If anybody has ever played Kingdom Hearts, you know what I'm talking about. There's plenty of doors that just show up through the power of the Keyblade. But that is enough for today. I'll see you Wednesday for our next reading of this, which will be a double reading because I owe you all from last week what I missed. I did not forget. I'm sorry. But I love you all. See you next time. Bye-bye. In a minute.